morning, guys. We are talking about our first big topic of globalization. It ties in with what you were learning earlier this week with human rights. And the topic is genocide. It's something that you may or may not know about. I'm going to bet that you probably don't, and that's totally good. We are going to start from the beginning and we're going to look at a historical, pretty famous example of it, and then we're going to look at a more modern day example of it. And we're going to conclude this topic with watching a movie on it we're going to start it on Friday and then we'll kind of carry it into next week and I'll explain how we're going to do that with remote learning. We're not going to let that stop us from watching some great documentaries and movies. So I will tell you, if you do have little brothers or sisters hanging around or helping you with school, or you're all doing schoolwork the same, this might not be the lesson that they need to see or listen to because there is some kind of sensitive material, and we just want to make sure that they're not being exposed to anything that they're not ready for. Okay. So if you get to something in the presentation that you have a question about, or that you're just like, I don't think I can handle this right now, message me, email me, and let's work through it together. It's really hard to do a virtual classroom with this lesson because not everybody can be available at the same time, and I get that. So unfortunately, one of the most interesting pieces of this lesson is when students have questions that I can kind of dig deeper in. So please, please, please email those questions and I will happily answer you back quickly, okay? So we're going to go on and get started. So like I said, our topic is genocide, okay? So we're going to introduce it. We're going to spend a couple of days on this, and then on Friday, we're going to start our first movie, and you're going to get some background knowledge today about it, okay? So let's see. All right, so we have the word genocide. So if this was a regular class, I would ask you, does anybody know what it is? There might be a couple of hands that know what it is, but most of the time, seventh graders are not very familiar with it, and that's totally cool. But the definition is the deliberate killing of a large group of people, especially those in a particular ethnic group or nation. So people that come from the same background or from the same geographical location, that they are the targets of this deliberate killing. And deliberate means you intend to do it. Okay. So again, I would ask you, does anybody know what the most historic example of genocide is? And occasionally one or two of you might know it, and that is the Holocaust. So this is going to be our historical reference, okay? And if you don't know what the Holocaust was, it was the systematic and planned killing of between 6 and 11 million Jews and other groups of people seen as undesirable to Hitler during World War II. I'm actually going to move this over here just so you can see all the text, okay? And so we will get back to this. So, that's not going to work. So maybe we're just going to come back over here. All right. So unfortunately, genocide is still something that occurs today. This is not something that happened 100 years ago and it just is gone for good. It still is happening. And there are stages, there are warning signs to how this happens, and you should be aware of them. So we're going to go through them. The next slide is going to talk about writing down. The good news is you don't have to write down anything. You will need to pay attention. There will be a kind of quiz assessment after this just to make sure you watched the video, you paid attention to the lesson, and good news is you can go back and watch the video as you're taking the quiz. That works too, okay? So it is important. There's a couple things that all stages don't go on at the same time. So they're kind of like a cycle. Some can happen at the same time, but others have to come before. The later stages obviously must happen at the end after the beginning stage. And another really good thing is that at each stage, preventative measures can stop it. So at any point in this process, if enough people and enough governments come forward and take the measures that they need to, genocide can be stopped before it even begins. So that's why we're going over this. So stage one is classification. Classification is typically a science word. You hear it in your science class where we're talking about, well, let's classify animals, okay? So but in terms of genocide, we are classifying societies and identifying their populations by categories like black or white, Muslim, and Christian. So you're basically taking people and you're putting them into a group, okay? You're creating this kind of us versus them mentality where if you are in this group, you are the us and you are better and you are going against everybody else. Everybody else is going to want the same goods as you, they're going to want the same opportunities as you, they are your competition. It is a primary method of dividing society and creating a power struggle between groups. Imagine if I took our class and I said, okay, I'm going to put half the kids in this group and I'm going to put half the kids in this group. In one group, I have all these smart kids, and in the other group, I have all these dumb kids. That creates a struggle, whether it's based off of just my opinion, okay? That's not okay to do. We cannot classify. We know every person is more than just one identity, okay? So, how do we prevent this? We have common language, we have common nationality and customs. What does that mean? So, instead of saying, oh, well, these are the smart kids in the class and these are the not smart kids in class, we say, these are the students of the class. Okay. We are all Everett students. So, we create that common language so everybody feels like they belong, everybody feels like they are a part of something. So in Rwanda, that's going to be the more common, more current type of genocide that we're going to look at. This is an example of how they classified. So this all kind of began when the Belgians distinguished between these two groups. So again, here are the Belgians, white guys coming in, and there were two tribes. There were Hutus and there were Tutsis. Okay. And they decided that they were going to classify them by their nose size. So, how big, how long, and how wide someone's nose was, how tall they were, and their eye type. So, you can see in this picture right here, they're measuring their nose and they're looking at their eye color right here. Okay. And another indicator of to distinguish Hutu farmers from Tutsi pastoralists were the number of cattle owned. So if you owned more than 100 cattle, you might be a Hutu. If you own less than 100 cattle, you might be a Tutsi. They're just different tribal groups. They really have no other significance beyond that. But when the Belgians colonized Rwanda, and we're going to talk more about that tomorrow, they decided to put Hutus and Tutsis into different groups based off of things that they could measure. Stage two is symbolization. Okay, so you can see, so we've got a couple of symbols. This is probably the most famous symbol in regards to the Holocaust. That's the Nazi flag. Up here we have the six-pointed yellow Star of David. It says Juif, which is Jew, I believe in French. Um, and you can see down here that we have two Jewish women who are wearing their stars, and we're going to talk about why they had to wear them. And this was a Cambodian ID card. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So when we give names to the classifications like Jews or Germans, Hutus, and Tutsis, we are giving them uniforms to wear, okay? So every member of the Nazi party wore this on an armband, and it was a symbol that they belonged to that group. Every Jew had to have this article sewn onto their clothing, either on a shoulder or an arm. They always had to wear it. Some even had armbands so they could take it on and off. And that was so that they could be identified as that group that they'd been classified into. Colors and religious symbols. That red is very symbolic of Nazi Party, and this yellow star was very symbolic of the Jews during the Holocaust because it stood out. It popped off of people's clothing so you could see them from a very, very long distance, and that was not necessarily a good thing. So prevention. How do you stop it once you start seeing this? We have to make hate symbols and hate speech unacceptable or illegal. That's why when teachers see you, if a teacher saw a student draw this type of symbol, I kind of freak out a little bit and I get really upset because of what it symbolizes, the hatred and the killing that it kind of goes for in history. So please, be aware of that and whatnot. All right, so stage three is dehumanization. Okay. So, this is where one group denies the humanity of the other group. Members of it are equated with animals, vermin, insects, diseases. Okay. So, basically, when you say, oh, you're not a person, you're a cockroach, or you're not a person, you're a rat. Well, you're not killing a rat, or you're not killing, I'm sorry, you're not killing a person, you're killing a rat, you're killing a rodent. Okay. We don't think of exterminators as murderers because they're killing pests and bugs, right? And that's kind of where this stage comes into play, is that when you take away the humanity, it takes out that murder aspect because we equate murder with a human. And if you're not viewing the people who are dying as people, then you're not murdering them. Okay. And again, the same thing with prevention, making hate symbols and hate speech unacceptable or illegal. So, up here in this picture, you can see that they are kind of putting a question mark over a very stereotypical image of a Jewish person during the time of the Holocaust. And they would make them out to be more rodent like. They would equate the sizes of their nose with being hook like and very evil. Um, and over here, this is one from a Rwandan propaganda piece. So this is another example. So this was an ad that ran in a magazine. Not sure when, probably in the 1940s, but you can see that obviously this is in a different language, but the caption reads, "Does the same soul dwell in these bodies?" So you can see that they're trying to equate that these white, blonde haired, light skinned, light eyes, they're what the Jews were totally not. They're what, sorry, that doesn't make sense. They're what the Germans wanted as the perfect race. That's what they saw as the perfect human. And more people who were very ethnic and not blonde haired, blue eyed individuals, they were basically saying, these aren't humans. How can the same soul dwell in these two white, blonde haired, blue eyed guys live in these two people? Okay. And that was where they started saying, these two are real humans and these two are nothing more than rodents and should not exist, which we know is not acceptable. So, stage 4 is organization. Okay. So, genocide is always organized. It is not something that just happens overnight. It's not something that you say, hey, let's go out and kill a whole bunch of people who belong to this one group. And 5 minutes later, you're all out the door. Okay. It is organized. Unfortunately, it's usually organized by a government. Okay. The UN, the United Nations, should stop weapon sales to countries involved in genocide. So the UN, which is a national, or I'm sorry, a global organization that can interfere with global interactions, with the global markets, and they can kind of step in and protect us. So you can see up here in this picture, this is Hitler. Okay. Excuse me. We talked about how Hitler was a totalitarian leader. Remember, I said he was a really good public speaker. He was able to get people to support him, to back him, to be behind him. And he was the leader of this movement. He was the organizer of this movement. Okay. Down here, you can see that these are some of the Rwandan militia that are going after the groups. Okay. And we're going to talk about them a little bit more in a bit. I don't want to give too much away right now. So next we have polarization. Okay. So polarization is when I can't talk today, guys. I'm really sorry about that. Extremists drive groups apart using propaganda and unfair laws. Okay. Laws are passed that forbid intermarriage or social interaction. So if we go back up to that word polarization, so think about two magnets and they have poles, and poles are on the opposite ends. Okay. I'm in the right. So when you polarize something, you are pushing groups as far away as you can from one another. Okay. So that forbidding intermarriage. So if you were a Christian Jew and you wanted to marry a German Jew, that was illegal. If you were married already, Your marriage was completely null and void. You weren't allowed to do that, okay? Social interaction. So if you went to a school with a bunch of different religious groups, guess who was the first to be kicked out? The Jewish kids, okay? And you weren't allowed to socialize. If you were a German Christian, you weren't allowed to socialize with those Jewish kids because sorry, we got to keep y'all separate, okay? Because Hitler was saying that these German Christians are so much better, they're so much more worthy of life than Jews, okay? Political moderates were silenced, threatened, and intimidated, and even killed. So if people stood up and said, this is the stupidest law you could have, it makes no difference if a Jew and a Christian are married. Why is that a big deal? Those people could be thrown in jail, those people could be killed, those people could have their families attacked, okay? So it's going to keep those people from speaking out. So how do we prevent this once this stage is happening? It's takeovers by extremists should be opposed by international action, which means when we see someone who could bring about another genocide come into power, it's the global it's the Earth's response, it's our world's response to step in and stop it by any means necessary to prevent stuff like this from happening again. So, a second part of polarization is that attacks are staged and blamed on targeted groups. So, you can see that these are some different. This picture is of the Reichstag fire in 1933. This is a German government building. Guess who got blamed for it? The Jews. Guess who actually did it? They think the Germans. Okay. So they did something to make it appear like the Jews did this awful act to make everyone else go, oh my God, the Jews did this. They're awful. We need to go against them. Hence the polarization. And now we've split two groups even more apart. Cultural centers of targeted groups are attacked. So over here, this is an image from Kristallnacht, which means the night of broken glass. And this was an organized attack um, on any German business, I'm sorry, not German business, on any Jewish owned business, on Jewish synagogues, and they were burned and they were broken and then they were attacked. So, preparation. Okay, so we've talked about organization, we've talked about polarization. So, preparation. We said that genocide's always organized, always by a government. So, victims are separated because of their ethnic or religious identity. So, victims can be deported to famine struck regions for starvation. So they could say, okay, we are going to round up all of the Jews and we're going to send you out to this part of the country where there's no food, there's no water, there's really no electricity of any kind. So you're either going to starve to death, you're going to be dehydrated, or you're going to freeze to death. And so that did happen to certain families. Um, Another piece of preparation is that weapons for killing were stockpiled and even extermination camps were being built. And that's where we're really going to start talking about. Um, this is kind of the point where people should be starting to speak up, and people usually are so afraid at this point that it's kind of too late, but it never is too late. Um, and again, UN needs to stop it at this point. Another part about this preparation is victims are separated. If you know anything about the Holocaust, there were neighborhoods where they would take entire Jewish communities in a city and move them to a single block within walls where they would live in very crowded, very unhygienic areas, and they weren't allowed to leave. So think of like a mini neighborhood type prison, and that's where they would keep them before they would take them to either an extermination camp or they would take them to be deported or something like that. I wish I was in the classroom with y'all guys. I have so many really cool pictures of all this kind of stuff. um, we will get there, and I promise next year we will do this right. So here are some more preparation pictures. So you can see here that even in a wedding photo, you see the yellow Star of David. Okay. So this is the outside of one of the most famous concentration camps for the Holocaust, and this is the entrance to Auschwitz, and it is designed to look like a train terminal. Okay, And this is the entrance to it. If you've ever seen, I think it's X-Men First Class, maybe, where Magneto kind of finds his powers, you see this sign because that's kind of, they embed that little piece of history into it, which is kind of cool. And it says Arbeit macht frei, and that means in German that work will set you free. So what they did in these pictures, that they deliberately planned the entrance to look like this to avoid causing panic, because what they would do is the Jews would arrive on train cars, and train cars, if you've ever read any type of Holocaust book, they always talk about the train ride because it was one of the most horrific pieces. But what they would do is they made it look like a train terminal, because when people would start looking out the window, if they just saw a train terminal or a train depot, well, they're like, oh, well, we're just going to get off of this train and get onto another one. Not a big deal. If they made it look like an extermination camp, a concentration camp where they were killing everybody, it would cause a panic, and people would start freaking out, and it would become a much bigger mess for the Nazis than if they kept everybody calm. And they use that phrase, work will set you free, because they said, well, hey, if you do everything we ask, we'll let you go at the end of all this, even though most of the time that was not true. So you can see over here, this is a picture. Once they would get off the trains, they would usually be sorted, and they would look at how healthy you were, how old you were, and they would basically go, you would be sent to the left or to the right, depending on if you were a mom with a young baby, if you were old, if you were sick. If you were lucky, you were sent in the line where you got to go into the camps to work. If you were not lucky, you might be sent immediately to the crematorium and the gas chambers, where they would immediately kill you, unfortunately. You can see right here, this is an SS officer. That's one of the names of what they called the Nazis who worked in the camps. And you can see that he does have a rifle on him to basically make everybody stay in line. Stage 7, this is extermination. This is where it starts getting even darker than usual. So genocide is extermination to the killers because they don't believe their victims to be fully human, okay? So that's why if you have a cockroach infestation, you don't call a roach murderer, you call an exterminator, because who the subject is. So in this picture, unfortunately, this is a real picture. It is pretty grisly to look at, and I'm sorry if it's too much, just kind of put a piece of paper over it. But this is what happens on what they would call a death march. So they would have all the Jews walk miles and miles and miles. Sometimes they couldn't even stop to sleep or go to the bathroom for fear that if they did, they would be shot on sight. But what they would do is they would basically line them up, and they would have a firing squad murder each and every one of them, unfortunately. And a lot of times they would just leave them buried into a mass grave. So once the extermination actually starts, only rapid, which means really, really fast, and overwhelming, which means just an onslaught of people coming in and stopping it um, with weapons, can bring a genocide to its end. Okay. It's not like you can just walk in and go, okay, guys, we're not going to do this anymore. Let's be all friends again. That's not how it's going to end. So in Rwanda, the government organized the extermination of the Tutsis in 1994. So the Hutus were going after the Tutsis. And again, we'll talk more about this. Unfortunately, these are real skulls. Okay. I know this is a pretty graphic and gory picture, but it's important to see that these were some of their trophies. They were kind of bragging about, look at all of these Tutsis that we've killed. And they didn't refer to them as Tutsis, they refer to them as cockroaches. Because remember, they didn't see Tutsis as humans. They saw them as bugs that needed to be crushed and stepped on and eliminated. So stage 8 is denial. So always following a genocide, it's the surest indicator of future genocide. So when you deny something, you say, oh, it didn't happen. A little kid breaks a lamp. I didn't do that. The dog did it. Or did you eat that donut? No, I didn't eat that donut, when you have powdered sugar all over your face. Okay. Denial can be a really simple thing, but it can also be a really awful thing. Okay, when it comes to that. Denial extends the crime of genocide to future generations of victims. It's a continuation of the intent to destroy the group. So there are people, unfortunately, who deny that the Holocaust ever happened. They deny that that the Germans killed over 6 million Jews. They just think, oh, there's no way they could have killed that many people. Imagine if somebody was telling you that and your grandparents or your great grandparents were killed in concentration camps. Imagine how hurtful that would be to you. That's why we say it's an extension of the crime. So the response to denial is punishment where the regime is overthrown. So the government gets overthrown, government gets tossed out one way or another, and the UN kind of helps set up courts and trials to basically bring the perpetrators, the people who did the wrongdoing, to justice, bring them to trial and find a sentence worthy of it. So there are some stages of denial. So denial, just like genocide, happens in stages. Okay. So the first one is to deny the evidence. Oh, there's no 6 million graves. There weren't that many Jews in Germany. There were, and there were all over. And now they're not there anymore. And people would say, well, it doesn't exist. Okay, you can't prove it to me. Um, People will say there wasn't any mass killing at all. And we know that to be true. They question and they minimize the statistics. So if you give them data, they'll say, well, where did you get that data? Those numbers are made up. That's fake news. Okay. They question, they minimize the statistics. They block, excuse me, they block access to archives and witnesses. So people who are speaking out on this, well, they censor their interviews, they censor their stories. Okay. They intimidate or kill eyewitnesses. So the government says, hey, if you speak out about what happened in Germany, we're not only going to go after you, but we're going to go after your family. So that's going to keep a lot of people quiet. They destroy the evidence. Okay. So in Nazi Germany, in concentration camps, they burn the bodies. That's why they had crematoriums, because a pile of ashes, you can't count how many skeletons are there. And that's a really grisly thought, but it's the reason they did it. Okay. They would find mass graves. So they would find just these massive holes in the ground of just skeletons and skeletons and skeletons piled up on each other. Sometimes they would throw the bodies into rivers or seas so that they couldn't be counted. Um, you can't count, or you can't try someone for something that you can't count. You can't say, oh, we're going to try you for the murder of 6 million Jews if you don't have evidence of 6 million dead Jews, unfortunately. They attack the truth tellers. So anybody who's coming out to speak the truth, they're going to say, oh, well, this person is crazy. This person is depressed. This person has mental health issues. Whatever the reason, they're going to try and discount that person and make them feel like they are not a credible source of information. They deny genocidal intent. Oh, we didn't mean to we didn't mean to kill all these Jews. These were prisoners. These were people that were enemies of our government. We weren't killing Jews. We were killing people who fill in the blank, whatever it was. They try and say, we didn't realize this was genocide. We were fighting a war, or whatever it was at the case. They blame the victims. Well, it's their fault they were born a Jew. And we all know that's not a thing. You have no control over the race you were born, the color of your skin, your religious preference, anything. That you can't blame the victim. But this is what they would do. They would do anything they could, because they knew once they were caught, it wasn't good for them. Okay. And then they deny for current interest. They deny to cover their butts. Okay. So if I was a business owner that got really wealthy off of the Holocaust, well, I'm going to deny that so that people don't boycott my business, so that I can stay in business and keep making money. So that's an example of how somebody would deny for current interest. Okay. So that is our lesson on introduction to genocide. Not a happy topic, but really, really interesting, at least to me. Which I don't know what that says about me, but whatever. Y'all miss me and I miss all of y'all too. So I hope you enjoyed this lesson. Tomorrow we are going to do another video on introduction to Rwanda. And that is just going to cover the background so that when we go in and watch the movie, you will have an understanding because they kind of just jump into the film. And I want you to I want you to understand what's going on without having to stop and email every 2 minutes saying, Miss Walker, I don't understand what's happening. Okay. So if there's any part of this that you didn't understand, please feel free to email me or send me a comment. There is going to be a quick little Google form to fill out, just so I know that you listened to this presentation. Sorry you had to listen to me for so long. I know you're not used to hearing me this long, but I hope you enjoyed it. Take your quiz, take your attendance that you need to, and I will talk to y'all later. Bye, guys.